South Africa remains the country with the highest number of people living with HIV. 7.7 million people are infected. As the world celebrates Zero Discrimination Day today, we look at how people living with the epidemic continue to experience discrimination. Joining us now is AIDS activist Criselda Kananda. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me.
Criselda, living in an urban area, one might not come into contact as often with the types of discrimination that people living with HIV and AIDS face in more remote parts of the country. What kinds of daily struggles are people confronted with still in 2020, despite having come so far in terms of spreading awareness, action campaigns against discrimination?
You might believe that people who are in urban areas don't face discrimination, and it's not the case. I mean, I remember when I got married, some of the questions that were asked my husband is, are you guys practicing safe sex? I mean, those questions are not asked when people's status is unknown. And because of how HIV was introduced to society, people don't want to be associated with a sexually transmitted infection. And I believe that we need to just go back and unlearn, to relearn that this is a viral infection that affects one's ability to fight infections. And we have not even begun to unpack what that means. And people are just stuck in the sexual transmission. And I guess that's where most stigma comes from. But I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight an issue that is not often addressed, and that is self-stigma. Often people talk about other people will gossip about me, other people will say things about me, and it's mostly things you're saying to yourself. And if we can just deal with the personal stigma, that will take away many of the challenges that we face. Personal stigma in that a person already feels unworthy, already feels dirty, already feels... There's so many things that are associated with HIV. And once we get individuals to acknowledge that this is a human affecting a viral infection, and if you are infected, you're part of a human race. We just happen to have a viral infection in this time as we now shifting the focus to coronavirus. I mean, we will continue, when challenged by viruses that are unknown, isolate people until when?
That's very important, specifically now, as you mentioned the coronavirus, so that self-discrimination.
That's it.
Not only the people infected with HIV and AIDS are discriminated against. There are people surrounding every infected person who are also affected by HIV and AIDS. And how do they experience discrimination?
I always give an example of one of my daughters at school, where she comes back to school the one day and someone writes on the board that don't, in the toilets, that don't get close to so-and-so. I'm not going to mention her name because her mother has AIDS. And I am so grateful of the relationship that I have with my daughters. It was not one of the secret disease, but I took them into confidence and taught them what it means to live with HIV. And she then took it upon herself to invite all of them and said, I'll invite my mother to come and address you so that you get educated, and we'll ask her to even give you an opportunity to ask questions. And if we can empower more and more citizens to just take charge, don't see it as stigma. It would be unfortunate when people are then stigmatized against that they don't have access to services, like we did in the previous years when it was difficult for some people to have access to medication. When we do such, that is unfortunate, because a health system is supposed to be all-encompassing and ensuring that citizens have access. But on a daily basis, you and I can just make those minor, checks that this is discrimination when I say this about a person. And I mean, I am so grateful for the invitation with the NCA, but I have to correct one thing, that I'm not an AIDS activist. Anything that you activate, you are for it. And I live with HIV and HIV alone. I've never had AIDS, and doing everything within my power to ensure that I don't get to the AIDS stage. And I think in the beginning, reluctance in differentiating between HIV and AIDS has brought us here, because we don't say hypertension, stroke, we don't say diabetes, gangrene. It is the consequence of not taking care of HIV that leads you to that complication. So if we can also just address some of the language that we use, and in the language being used, that we don't discriminate knowingly and unknowingly.
So the access to ARVs and increased quality of life amongst people who are HIV positive has also changed how we think of interacting with role models. And how important is that in destigmatization of young people, older people, people in different communities having access to healthy, productive role models to speak to them about life with HIV?
I think now, knowing now that when you have contracted this disease, you are able to have healthy children who don't have HIV. You are able to manage the viral load in your system that you don't transmit to your sexual partner. There are so many positives and gains that have brought us. I mean, so much work had to go into us getting here now. Now that people know that there's minimal risk in infection, and that still does not take away the need to still educate, because to date we have the highest number of teenage pregnancies, and obviously when they are pregnant it means they are not utilizing protection, and these are some of the challenges that we still face because of the stigma that was associated earlier on. And indeed having access to healthcare, having access to medicines have indeed changed significantly how people then view being infected.
Right, thank you very much for coming to see us today. Criselda Kananda speaking to us on Zero Discrimination Day, specifically about discrimination against people living with HIV and AIDS.